start recording?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't get notification. Did it start?
Yes, Kevin, it has started.
Okay, I don't see it on my screen, so I don't know. So I'll trust you. Yep. Okay, now it showed up. Okay, so this is a September 22nd hangout meeting for MicroProfile, and we are holding these weekly now while we're trying to establish the working group. I mean, I know we had them before, but we're trying, you know, we've got some deadlines in front of us here, and so there's things that we need to work through, so we're going to be holding these hangouts every week now until we can get this through the process. So as always, the agenda and the minutes are open and writable. The couple people have put the links into the chat. Please put your name in as an attendee and help us keep track of the minutes as we go along. Okay, so I know I looked at the agenda earlier today, and Amelia, I know you had a ton of items out there, but
let's prioritize. Kevin, I'm not attached to anything. We always prioritize.
Yeah.
Let's prioritize.
Okay, so one of the things that came up, it actually did get, it came up during one of the Jakarta steering committee calls earlier, and then again today it came up, and Oracle is, let me get down to here. Okay.
Kevin, before you go on, because you're sharing your the browser with history. Thank you. I'm not sure if anything was sensitive, but maybe you can cut it out of the video.
Okay. I don't know if anything was sensitive or not. Okay.
Yeah.
So I doubt it. I just do boring stuff here at work, so I don't think anything embarrassing would show up.
Good to know.
Okay, so going back here. So Oracle in particular, there were some other companies that may have been interested in this, but Oracle in particular, they liked everything with the MicroProfile working group charter and the associated specification process, except for the length of the review period for the specifications. The default for the Eclipse specification process is 1 week, and that's what we had all agreed to as a community. We're going to just go with the standard EFSP. And Oracle's requesting that to be extended to 2 weeks. That is consistent with what was required for Jakarta EE. So they are also requesting, not demanding, but requesting that we make a similar update. They did indicate through the discussions that we had, I mean, David, of course, has been very active with that. John Kling normally is, myself. We did ask about, okay, then could we also, I mean, not that we agreed to it, but if we did a 2-week time period for the ballot, then could we also say that, okay, if everybody has voted, then we could mark the ballot complete early. So let's say everybody votes after 5 days, then we could say, okay, the vote is complete because we don't have to wait the full 2 weeks. And Oracle was okay with that as well. What they asked for today, they were asking, well, what's the status of this request? And Dave and I were kind of talking on the side, and it's kind of like, well, we really haven't brought this forward yet because we were still doing stuff with, you know, making sure that the charter was going to be accepted and get out for review and stuff. So I put this in as a first item on our agenda for today so that we could have a discussion about it, get input from various people. I did put in one personal hesitancy from this. When I have talked with David and John in the past on this, you know, by doing a 2-week review period, that could, and I'm not trying to say that it would, but it could affect our 3 times per year release cycle. If, you know, the 2-week review cycle, if we start having dependencies between multiple specs and between the platform spec, the review cycle could lengthen. I mean, basically double what we have right now. So that is one thing to be concerned about. The other thing is that if we would go this route, then we would require a derivative MicroProfile specification process, which although it would be minimal, it still would be another piece of work that we would have to bring through, create, review, and approve through the community to get that associated with the charter, you know, just kind of like a rev of the charter and the specification process. So that's my 2 cents worth of the proposal and the request, and it's open for some discussion.
Kevin, can I just jump in? Wayne added that no ballots can take less than 7 days. So, so it seems to be the bare minimum that they could be.
Oh, okay. So my example of 5 days isn't right.
Right.
Sorry. Okay.
And Wayne also said this could be implemented in a couple of different ways. And I think it's really up to MicroProfile to decide, do they just want to update the charter, or do they want to create a separate specification process like Jakarta EE did? So.
Well, in the case of Jakarta, it wasn't a separate process. Well, I guess it was called a separate process, but it was really just the customizations.
Right.
Pretty short.
Yeah. So you can either create a MicroProfile specification process document, which could be similar to what Jakarta EE did, and I think Wayne, to me, what was news to what Wayne said is you could just add this into the charter, which I hadn't considered, but then there was some discussion about that. So
okay, I missed that aspect of that discussion.
Right.
Well,
if we, sorry.
The other thing that,
yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, you've been trying to get in there, Scott. Go ahead.
the other thing that Wayne brought up is that anyone can request that a vote be extended to 30 days. So that is another monkey wrench, you know, in terms of scheduling, that there's an automatically a process in the EFSP that has that request ability.
So that does not have to be an approval of the steering or specification committee to allow for that?
No,
any
that's,
member can always request that.
yeah. That was another item that he had in that thread.
So I have a question about this, because like Kevin, I am concerned with the releases. MicroProfile has had 3 releases, with the exception of this year, 3 releases per year. And the 2 weeks impacts every other review. So it can go, based on what I saw in the thread and what we have seen in Jakarta, the delays can be massive. And I do not agree that we should add it to the charter, but the change on this can be negative for MicroProfile. Clearly, it will be amazing for Oracle and other organizations that are large to join, but I am extremely concerned about the flexibility to add a second week when we have seen that we can do the work within a week. And I believe that with more flexibility, without accountability, we become a little bit, by choice, reluctant to do things early because we have the flexibility. So my vote is for us to keep what it is, see and adjust, because we will not adjust the charter. So if it doesn't work on the first year, we can adjust it to maybe a little bit longer time. But why don't we try what we have done in the past that works for us? And Oracle, you're here. Ed, you're here. Oracle, I understood you were talking about, and then in the thread, vacations and approvals. Can you go into detail for us to understand this? Because if you spoke about that in a private meeting or private settings, that doesn't count. If it didn't get here, it doesn't count. So can you go and explain to us what are your needs so that we can curiously ask you questions and see if we can meet in the middle?
So I'll just assure you, there's been no private, other than us talking about it at Oracle, we haven't had any discussion with anybody else about this. right? So really this goes back to when we were starting the Jakarta EE specification process, and it was really about Oracle's got a fairly large portfolio of intellectual property. Oracle has a lot of, I'm not going to, we have a lot of very careful and prescriptive mechanisms for how can we get these kinds of things approved, and they take a long time, right? And I totally, I'm not trying to sell Oracle's processes. I'm just saying this is something that we had to have in order to make Jakarta EE work. Originally, Jakarta EE was going to be a 4-week vote, but based on the feedback we got at the time, we were able to cut that back to 2 weeks. I don't see how we can join with a shorter review period. It was a struggle for us to get it down from 4 weeks to 2. I'll just say it that way.
So I have some follow-up questions. So the primary, there's two things that I'm worried about from a MicroProfile perspective. The primary one is the release cadence. We do quarter releases, and that if they're fanned out, and so that we actually have to have a conversation that is unrelated to 2-week ballot periods. We have to have a conversation about the 1-week ballot period and how we're going to run our votes. Because if they're going to be done in serial, then already our quarter release goals are challenged. So that's a conversation that we should have on this call.
That's not part of what we're asking for.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. We need to have a conversation orthogonal to the 2-week question ask, which is how would we even handle the 1-week period? Now, if we got it all down to the point where we could do all the ballots in 1 week, the same week, and that week was extended by 1 more week, I personally don't see that as being such a big deal for that one ballot. The primary concern that I have is, aside from the cadence being quarterly, is that it needs to be acceptable to be able to -1 a vote and not incur a mandatory 2-week additional penalty. That's the real big concern. Like if we're 6 days into a vote and someone spots a problem, if it was a 7-day vote, if it was a 7-day period, you could -1, and then you're looking at just another week of deadline, and you can get your issue fixed, and it encourages quality. If it's 2-week periods and you're 6 days into a vote and that vote's not going to end for another 8 days, and then your -1 is going to trigger another 2-week period after that, you're looking at now, 8 + 14 onto the timeline. And, that's a much bigger stretch.
But
what would you be okay from an Oracle perspective if the first vote was 2 weeks, but if we found any issues and we had to re-vote, that one would be 7 days. Technically speaking, that actually give you, kind of like 3 weeks, to review. There's some re-rolling in there, but would that be functional?
So personally, I don't see how that really, let's say this, let's use the example we had in Jakarta EE. We had already voted +1 on that, and then the proposal team withdrew their spec, right? When they reproposed it, we +1 that right away. So in the case that you're proposing, the ballot would be closed at 7 days because we would have re+1'd it. We had all the approvals when I did the first +1. I wouldn't need to go get them again. So, so I think in practice, what you're I can't speak for everybody, right? I can, and I don't know that I can speak for, you know, for all situations, but it seems like if you already, unless there's something got added in, right? I don't know how you'd, I guess I don't know why you would need to treat second ballots differently. You still can get them done in 7 days if everybody votes.
Yeah, well, that's so my experience is that people are more concerned about timeline than quality when it comes to these niche issues, and are willing to let a lot slide to meet the timeline. And I would be concerned about that.
Right. David, I count that subsequent vote as kind of that's kind of second repeatable vote as still one ballot. So basically, the 2 weeks. That's the first term is 2 weeks. That's the initial vote. For the revote, I think it makes sense to to have a shorter period. So say 7 days. I'm
working
not
group
sure.
Structure doesn't have. Does it have a revote option? I mean, right now everything's 7 days. So.
Yeah. So.
And,
there is no revote option. Well, there's no way to change your vote in the current process. Once you voted, you voted.
No, that's not right either.
Yeah.
We have seen
you are allowed to change your vote.
Yeah, we have seen.
David did that for the CDI.
So that's why there's 7 days.
It is not outside the process. You know, there are verbal conversations that we've had where something was decided, and then 1 year later, the opposite of what we decided, the opposite understanding of what we decided manifests, and then we realize neither situation was actually written down and decided. So you will not be able to find in the specification process that you cannot change a revote. And we won't be able to find in the clip specification process that you can change a revote. So it's not mentioned, you know.
So David, just to,
but that's not what we're discussing. So yeah, go ahead, Ed.
I guess in the example that I think we're talking about, TDI, they withdrew that specification, right? It wasn't.
Yes.
There's no veto vote.
There's
right?
no veto
vote. There's no -1. You either can say yes or no, effectively. The CDI team withdrew their ballot, and then it started again.
Correct.
Right.
Well, and so I guess my reaction to the situation is, I personally don't think you need a second process to treat something as a different kind of vote. If it's going up for ballot again. If everybody was happy with it the first time, presumably they're more happy with it the second time, so they could just vote +1 and close it out in that 7-day period.
So probably the second time is we don't even need to wait for 7 days, do we? If it's
we do.
If it's
but
withdrawn and then resubmitted, I think my opinion, it would be treated as a separate ballot, but that's my opinion.
Right, I see.
Right. So I just want to address that. So I understand that the subsequent ballot could be 7 days, but in my experience, people are not. And first of all, that's new. I don't know that we've ever really thought about that. We don't have that written into the Jakarta side of the fence, so it's not.
No, none of this has to do with Jakarta.
But my experience when talking with people who are looking at a deadline is they're incredibly risk averse and take the most conservative action possible. So if they want to meet the deadline, will meet the deadline come what may. And so what I'm trying to create is a situation where meeting the deadline, but doing the revote if that's necessary is a good thing. And withdrawing the ballot is not necessarily always the best solution. So if they're thinking to -1 because they see some issues. They see some issues and they decide whether or not they're going to vote +1 or -1. If they feel that they can vote -1 and get it and guarantee it can be remedied in 7 days after the vote, they're more likely to vote -1, and then these things get fixed. If the risk is there that their -1 extends things out another 2 weeks, now we're at a month of voting, they're less likely to vote -1. And they're more than likely to let that stuff just slide and say, let's fix it real soon. And yes, the potential is there that if they get everybody's agreement to vote early, it could be done 7 days. But in the moment that they cast their vote, they don't have the confidence that they can get everybody's agreement. And so they're faced with this decision, do I potentially extend the deadline another 2 weeks? Nobody wants to do that. So we're probably not going to get a whole lot of actual meaningful votes unless there's a very serious issue. It's going to go through every time, even with issues.
And I don't know, David, I guess I don't buy that argument because like Ed pointed out, we do not have a veto. So a single -1 does not force a, redo. We would have to fail the vote completely with multiple -1s, or the submitter would have to declare, nope, pull that ballot out because I want to fix the changes that David highlighted. Okay, so if I'm looking, I'll just speak from my personal experience. If I'm reviewing something, I'm not going to care whether it's a 1 week or 2 week or 4 week extra review cycle. If I see something that I think should be resolved, then I would do a -1. And if I'm in the minority and people want to move forward, that's fine, but at least I voiced my opinion. I just don't see it where I would hesitate on my vote based on, oh crap, this is going to take too long to fix.
I don't know. Okay, I've observed different conversations amongst all of us in the past, so I don't necessarily have that same confidence.
Okay.
Well, but I also don't agree. I don't think the 2 weeks is that big a deal. Because there's a schedule problem, and there's also, you have to align with schedule boundaries for the Eclipse Foundation approval as well. So I don't think it's that problematic. And frankly, I also don't think slipping a deadline by 2 weeks is a problem either. It's more important to be accommodative to, the types of community that we want to be able to incorporate.
Yeah, I think is that we all kind of want to release something meaningful, useful. I wouldn't want to rush to release something like the other people don't like. The other things kind of for this 2 week, even for this 2 week, since like Wayne said, anybody can ask to extend for 30 days. So I don't see any, big issue with these 2 weeks either.
So no one cares that if we have a vote for 2 weeks and we get 3 -1s at the second week, we're looking at another 2 weeks, and that's 1 month, which is 1/3 of our release cycle.
I care. I care badly on this. This is going to come and beat us really hard.
We have a 3-month release cycle, and if we have to do a revote, we're looking at potentially 4 weeks.
This
right?
is just calling for messes. Mm-hmm.
Just a second, just to clarify that, we have a 4-month release cycle, not 3.
Okay.
Okay, so just to clarify that.
That does make a difference, yes.
I don't know if this matters at all, but is there a bit of a train model here where if it doesn't make one release, it goes in the next one, which is no more than 16 weeks later?
Yes.
Well, yeah, we already processed that way too.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I wanted to point out is that by including the extra clause, by saying that a spec review could close early if all of the members have completed their vote, then granted, that's not cast in concrete that it could be done within 2 weeks, but it does give us the opening that if a re-review would happen and everybody is like, okay, we're all on board, boom, let's get this done, then we're down to 1 week.
So if
Yeah.
the majority of you do not see the issue that David and I see, and we have not even talked about it privately, can we just not add it to the charter and adjust or write one page where we stipulate exactly how the MicroProfile releases will take form with the times and expectations? We can even make it into a wiki and keep it very clearly documented. I believe we're going to fail. Okay,
I didn't understand what you're asking.
I am asking, when we talk about this, because it seems that the majority of those of you attending agree that, okay, 2 weeks is not an issue. You, David, and myself are in the other side. I say, why would we change the charter? I'm concerned that
that's a different topic, so we haven't.
Yeah, but let me finish here. I am projecting the fear that because we are accommodating a partner that wants to join MicroProfile finally as an active contributor to the project itself, we will easily agree, not even meet in the middle, but agree to the request. What is taking onto MicroProfile working group to do the same for another partner that will come and ask the same similar situations that definitely will affect releases? Where do we stop? Because if we do it for one, can these requests and can these actions be scalable and can be a yes or a no with in the future for everyone that comes, and can we own it as we are doing it right now?
Okay, well, I'll disagree that we didn't meet in the middle, because we do have a criteria that says you can short circuit about a vote if everyone votes. And second, this is, in my view, an extraordinary
Situation
element because it involves IP, which is why we are forming a MicroProfile working group in the first place. If we didn't need this, we could just run it as open source project.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, right. The other thing I want to say is, if because all the spec need to go through a ballot, for example, config, for example, just take one spec thing. Okay, majority -1 clearly means that spec hasn't reached to the release standard. I think it's within that 7 days, I think it's very unlikely the issues probably can be rectified within a week. So MicroProfile can still release and without that specification, so that spec can go to the next release train. So that's the kind of, we are already operating this way though.
So then MP4, if we go with this and we say 2 weeks, but if everyone, votes within 7 days, when are we expecting to ship MicroProfile 4.0?
Right.
Under new scenario? And instead, can we do a comparison of the dates? If we launch the project on October 12th, when are we expecting to have MP 4.0 out?
Is the launch date the only criteria that we are interested here?
No, but I think it is one criteria. That was why I had put in here, if we needed a separate derivative MicroProfile specification process, then basically we're throwing MicroProfile 4.0 out the window for 2020. Now, this was new information to me that we could just, provide a small addendum or update to the charter and cover the same thing. Now, if we can do that, then I think that's just, I'm putting quotes around just, but a simple update to the charter, and we don't have to start any process over again, with all of the work that we're already doing with the Eclipse Foundation.
Well, we haven't gotten our working group fully established yet. So,
Right.
so what my concern about opening up the charter again is it took us forever to close it. And every time we open it up, some other change sneaks in.
And it always
but
took
this
like a
is-
month and a half.
And if we wanted to change our review periods at any point in the future, we would once again be opening the charter. And
That's a mess.
again, some other change would sneak in.
Yeah, that means.
Well, that kind of depends on how much control you want to put on it. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, so Oracle made this specific request. So it's not like we're opening up the whole charter again to, oh, what do you want to change? It would be.
No,
just
I
for
understand,
this
but every
specific
time that we've I just say that every time we've opened the charter for one very narrow purpose, we wind up in a call like this with a ton of other things on the agenda to, you know what I mean? It just invites, you know, every time you open the can of worms, it invites, oh, as long as we're going to do it, let's just slip this in, slip this in, and slip that in.
The only good thing now is that actually the control of that source for the charter is under the Eclipse Foundation control. It's not our Google Doc anymore. So there is much more control over what we would update.
Yeah,
But
I
let me
just
protect
find it difficult. I don't like the position we would be in that we wouldn't be able to streamline our specification process without redoing our charter.
Correct. So let me project, and I will stay quiet after this one because I am extremely uncomfortable. The conversation is fantastic and it's being recorded. I am uncomfortable because we have yet to do a release. So deciding to do something and add it to the charter, we create us to be less flexible. Isn't MicroProfile meant to try things and drop what doesn't work and then adjust later? Can we just be flexible to write a one-page document that creates a new, we said that we will use the Eclipse specification process, but we are not. So then can we just do one page and move forward? I am really, really against opening the charter. That thing took a long time. Any opening will create failure. And I also believe that we are going to fail under the new, mark my words, like I hope I am wrong, but this is going to fail as the try, but I prefer that we fail trying than not trying because we think we're going to fail. So can we agree on something without adjusting the charter?
Well, so Kevin, on that front, and Kevin, why do you think that just adding a one-line MicroProfile specification process upends this?
Yeah.
Well,
Should
so,
be
okay,
quick
so
process,
this,
right?
yeah, so this gets back to David's comment, because if we have to create a specification process, then we're starting from scratch. I mean, granted, it's a derivative, but we have to start from scratch. And that amount of time, because we're going to do it as a community, will take time and effort.
Well,
That's
that
the
would
one
be the
that I'm
same whether or not we put, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Summers wants to talk. Summers, go for it.
Okay. It sounds, so just turning the issue on its head a little bit, what if the outcome of all of this discussion is we just decide as a community that if you can't review a proposal within 1 week, then entities such as Oracle who say, then that means that entities such as Oracle, the proposal is too big for them and it's their right to -1 because they just can't consume it in a week.
Oh, you're so fantastic. Yeah. Plus
Well,
one.
the problem with that is they won't join in the first place.
I mean, like, I don't want to say that's a non-issue because like Oracle's a big deal, but it's a 1 week proposal. We're willing to cut the proposals and reorganize things so it fits within a week. That's meeting them halfway. That's a lot of work. But we also know that if, you know, like Kevin was talking about earlier, if we start opening this up, it just invites more in. We just got it all settled. Let's see how it works. And let's see if we can operate with it before we start tinkering with it.
Plus one, Summer, and I'm so glad I didn't have to say it. You rock.
So it's based on what Kevin suggested. Since Paul is also here, probably is ask Paul if we like modify that sentence and say how long it will take. So does it go through the whole thing again? So
Well-
people worried about open up for more things. Can we just say we switch this sentence with that sentence? Is that okay?
Emily,
Yeah.
Emily,
Can we-
why would we change the charter, and why are we not giving Summers the option for others to talk on what he just said? Oracle, how do you feel about voting -1 if you don't get to review a vote within a week?
I can answer that for them. It isn't their intention to join to vote -1 because their processes take a long time. That would
But
just
then
set
they
them
get-
up to be
but-
the villain every time.
But going back to what we were talking about earlier, if the -1 just tacks a week onto it, there's their 2 weeks.
Okay, but it doesn't. That does not tack, as we said, there's no veto vote.
There's no veto vote and there's no revote. Those provisions aren't in the working group.
Correct, and that is like the flexibility that the following up with the specification process has majority votes. So there would be, if Oracle joins, that would be about 6 or 7 members that we know joining the working group. For MP4, that will be maybe some -1, and then you know.
We're going to run out of time, and I do want to have the conversation about how we were planning to put the votes up, even with the 1-week process, because I think some clarity on that. You know, if, say, MicroProfile, JWT, and config are going up for a vote in the same release cycle, JWT relies on MicroProfile config. Are we going to be serializing these things such that we're going to wind up with a 3-week voting period because there's a dependency of A on B and B has a dependency on C, and therefore that's a 3-week period? Which, you know, is that what we're doing, or we're going to put them up in parallel as much as possible, perhaps even all specifications go up for vote at the same time?
Yeah, and that would depend on how hard these dependencies are, right? I mean,
I think
because if we need, just like, you know, the specification process says we need the spec, the API, the TCK, and a compatible implementation. And because of the dependencies, if you can't have a compatible implementation running a TCK without having, you know, fault tolerance needs config, okay, what are you going to do? I mean, then you probably do have to run them serially. Now, if there's something that can be done with doing interim, you know, milestone drivers or something that's public to be able to pull it in and create your compatible implementation, okay, well then maybe you can do more parallel. But that really depends on these dependencies, and it's a tough question to answer without knowing exactly, you know, the situation. It's the same stuff that's happening with Jakarta EE.
So I think for the MicroProfile specifications, quite a few spec depend on config. However, you could work with the previous version of the config. So I think is in order to shorten the time, we can put all for vote. For example, if a config didn't pass a ballot and others passed, and then it's kind of, we could remove a config from this. And then other spec can depend on previous version config, so we can still release. But 4.0 is a different. 4.0 is all the spec need to be released.
Would there be any reason we couldn't do that for all the votes?
What do you mean for all the votes?
Basically, we're releasing once a quarter, and if you want to make a release train, here's the day that your thing has to go up for a vote. If you have a dependency on something else, it's also going up for a vote. And
once we release every 4 months.
Yeah, so this is what I kind of try to say. So basically, all the spec can put up for vote at the same time. For example, if a config didn't go through, and so that's fine. Other spec can go back depending on the previous version config.
Well, they're already up for a vote. So I can understand so if JWT relied on config version 123, which, you know, just to make up a number, and JWT goes up for vote at the same time as MicroProfile config 1.123, that's fine. But if MicroProfile config fails its vote, we're obviously going to be looking at a delay on the JWT side because it won't be able to complete.
So in that case, kind of JWT, yeah. So it's thinking this JWT will change, just like change the dependency. Will that change also trigger a second vote? Because it doesn't affect anything else.
If JWT only refers to config 123, it could simply wait until config, it passed its vote. Let's talk it through. We say it goes up for a vote at the same time. It passes its vote, but it has an external dependency, so it can't be closed until config 123 is finished.
Yes, conditional
So,
offer.
We could put the vote up on the condition that if these dependent votes fail, this one won't be able to complete until those are completed. Meaning we don't have to go up for a revote. We could say it's done.
Correct.
It's just we're not publishing it until the dependent votes have completed. Does that sound reasonable to people? Then we could do more things in parallel.
This sounds reasonable. I have another scenario. I mean, people can.
Before we move on, I wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that type of approach is reasonable. I think that's kind of along the lines of what we've been trying to do with Jakarta EE, because we can't resolve all the dependencies up front.
Right.
And we have to be flexible there.
Yeah. So if we can get that going such that we can more aggressively push things up in parallel, I have significantly less concerns about a 2-week versus 1 week. If we're doing them in serial, then 3 weeks becomes 6 weeks, and that's like a terrible.
Yep.
That's not great.
Yeah, I agree.
That's reasonable, but what's stopping config to do its release earlier so it doesn't have to push? So that's the point, right? So we should probably, I mean, we have that as a backup, as a process, but most likely what we want to do is to incentive specs to actually release earlier instead of just pushing everything into the deadlines of the platform release. So we don't get, so the possibility for you to get into those kind of releases are going to be higher, instead of if you release often the other specs first, then most likely you're going to not have that many issues in that regard, right?
Assuming developers release way ahead of deadline and are proactive, don't wait to the last minute, don't sit on their release. In my experience, this doesn't happen.
It's called nirvana.
Exactly. In my experience, this doesn't happen, So
but
we can shoot for it, but
yes, the facility is there to support that.
Yes, but that's my point. I understand that argument, but I'm also saying that just trying to push things into the back instead of at least us trying to push specs to release sooner, and maybe try to come up with some incentives for that to happen, then it can probably help us fix some issues as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Roberto. I think we could try this with config. Also, we run ballot like for these 3 releases. However, is nothing stop us to run ballot for config outside this circle. For example,
right.
shortly after the MicroProfile 4 release, 2 months later, we want to do a ballot for config. So we can release another version of config, and then MicroProfile 4.1 comes up. Pick up the already released config like a 2.1. So in this case, we just trying to to speed up the process.
Yeah, I'll just point out nothing's been holding specification projects back from releasing early over the last few years. No
Yeah.
one's ever done it.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully with a ballot and then beat people
I
up.
understand, but no one's ever done it, right?
Probably the point is when you have these platform big release, right? Then you get into your mind that that's the deadline for everything, right? Instead of trying to split things in multiple pieces. Basically, what I'm saying is that I believe that's a mindset issue, not properly a process issue, right? We just have to change our mindset.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion. I just don't think that will actually happen. I think people will not be aware that other things are dependent on them. They themselves will plan to get their stuff done on their own timeline, looking only at the platform timeline, not considering the Gantt chart of other things that depend on them, the things that depend on them, and so on. In absence of someone beating them over the head and telling them, here is where you sit in a long serial chain, so you need to get done quicker. In absence of that person telling them, they'll just proceed as if they're the only spec that has, like they're the last spec out the door. And as long as they can get theirs done before the platform release at any time, they'll be good.
Well, I agree. So that was my actual point. Shouldn't the working group push into that direction?
We can. We're doing that on the Jakarta side of the fence. It's really hard.
Yeah.
We're failing on that side. Okay, listen to this.
Anyway.
So folks, hold on a second. So let me interject here. Summers said something that is so important, and we're not listening, or maybe we're choosing to skip on what he said. Summers, let me know if I understood you correctly. You're saying we keep what currently is. Any member, any participant member can request a ballot extension. Ed, is Oracle willing to join under those circumstances? We changed nothing because there are so much at risk, and we will be so flexible, keeping in mind that you have told us today, and actually early at the forum, that these are the restrictions that you have as a member that want to join in 2020.
So we discussed this. Oracle does not want to join and then have to be throwing in this 30-day extension. Seems to me that's too long, right? And there's no other option.
Right. Voting
so we don't want to be the villain, and we also don't. If we just -1, then the ballot is closed anyway, right?
Yeah, -1 doesn't guarantee anything. That does not guarantee that it goes to a 2-week vote.
Right. I think that point that Ed was making was in reference to Summer's suggestion that it become an automatic -1. I think the situation is that a vote is a vote, -1 or +1, and Oracle wouldn't be able to make a vote of any kind guaranteed within a 1-week period.
Well,
the crucial thing
there's a slight subtlety in that, which is if any ballot is taking longer than a week to digest, to review, and to form an opinion on, then that in and of itself is evidence that there might be an underlying problem with the ballot with whatever issue is being voted on. It's too complicated.
Not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, it is a okay thing to think. It's just that we have just, it's just that Oracle's constraints are their internal slowness is internal.
I understand that Oracle has Oracle's Oracleness.
Right.
That there are things about Oracle, just as there are things about AJUG, just as there are things about all of the other organizations. And I guess where I'm going with all of this is that how do we produce work that is as consumable to Oracle as it is to all of the other groups? Because I feel like that's actually what the problem sounds like, or I'm missing something huge that we are not doing, like, these ballots don't appear out of nowhere. It's not like Oracle's going to go, oh my God, I didn't know there was a config version 2 coming out.
Right.
And have to review from like 6 months of work from scratch. And, you know, that just doesn't sound believable to me.
Yeah, but in my mind, that argument goes both ways. You could just as easily move the ballot back a week and it's the same argument. I mean, again, where you're coming from has a naivete with respect to how large corporations run.
And what I'm saying is, fill in that naivete.
That they have a legal process that's triggered by an actual ballot coming up. It's not a hypothetical that's out on a calendar. It's that there's a legal process behind the reason why we can't run this as a simple open source project. I mean, to me, this is the fundamental issue. Is this is centered on the crux of why we even have a MicroProfile working group. I mean, to me, this is a one-off issue. I completely disagree that this is a generic subterfuge of how MicroProfiles run in general. You know, I mean, frankly, if that's the opinion, we should really not be moving toward a MicroProfile working group.
We have no choice.
Don't have a choice.
We're forced into
Well,
it.
you do have a choice.
No
You can
choice.
take
No, we
your
don't.
guys and do whatever you want and be subject to the IP liability constraints.
That was
No,
not a choice that was
That is
offered.
not even a
And
choice.
then, well,
I
and
feel
be
like
cognizant
you
of
are
why
right.
there's a MicroProfile working group.
Scott, I'm feeling a little attacked right now. And like, I've been in this industry for a while, so I feel kind of shitty that you're saying, hey, you're being naive. There's this big old legal process we have to go through. Because, hey, I'm worried that because Oracle can't consume our work product in the time that we have said and the time that we have agreed that members will have, that we might be producing a bad work product.
I think it's
And
a valid
I
concern.
don't like having you're being naive. This isn't some small thing thrown back at me.
Well, this isn't a small thing. So I completely disagree with that categorization. This is a fundamental reason why there's a working group as opposed to an open source project.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I know this is a big thing, and you are telling me I'm being naive and treating it as a small thing.
No, I'm saying you're being naive on focusing on 7 days versus 14.
No,
I don't see that fundamentally changes. And the general opinion has been along those lines. It does not fundamentally change the nature of MicroProfile.
All right, hold on, guys. So and gals. So let me pause because I think the 1 week versus 2 week is actually a secondary concern versus how we intend to run our votes in general, which is why I raised that question. And let me express to you in numbers why one has a bigger impact than the other. If we're running them in serial and we have, like I say, 3 things that depend on each other in a chain, that's a 3-week voting period under our 1 week thing, right? If we're running them in parallel, then it's a 1 week that could potentially become a 2 week, which is still 1 week faster than the 3 week situation that I mentioned, right? So 7-day votes run it in serial is instantly going to be much longer than 2 weeks in parallel or 1 week in parallel. So if we don't decide if we have to decide how we're going to be running our votes for 1 week versus 2 weeks to really matter. If we decide we're running them in parallel, then, if we're deciding running them in serial, then like I say, that's a 3-week period potentially we're going to be running votes for. That if we decide 2 weeks, then becomes 6 weeks. If we decide we're running them in parallel, then it's either 1 week or 2 week, and it's still manageable. It's almost like 2 weeks versus 1 week doesn't even matter if we're running them in parallel. Do you see where I'm coming from? If we don't decide on parallel versus serial, then the time period of the vote is being even 1 week won't get us a fast vote.
So
Can we close that up in our last few minutes?
I think we're not going to get to any agreement here. And
Especially if you take the last minute to say that won't happen. So can we just get like a show of hands? Who would want to run them in serial, one at a time? And it takes as long as it takes. Anybody?
How many votes are we talking about? Do you have a ballpark?
5.
Yeah, I think even with serial, you have more than one dependencies. For instance, I think that config is used by specification A and A is used by specification B. So if you do it in serial in any way, it can be more than
many weeks,
more than 2 or 3 periods. So I think serial is not an option, and if we can go around with not announce it, as you say, that we have to wait until all the other depending votes are processed, then why not do it then in parallel?
Okay.
Yeah,
whatever the time period is, 1, 2 weeks or a month or whatever.
Yeah, I also vote parallel.
Okay. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
Yeah. So I think parallel is the way that we have to approach this, regardless. Right. I think.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But the follow-on is I think we do have to impose additional structure that calls out things like dependencies, because in other words, we're not going to have a successful platform specification. So this all falls on the burden of the platform being able to release. It has to absorb all the dependencies and TCK issues, which further pull in compatibility implementation issues.
But that was a long way of saying you prefer parallel.
Yeah, but the caveat is, I mean, we've been a bit blasé on the requirements with respect to dependencies. I think we're going to have an explicit tracking of that.
Right.
Okay.
So
I will just summarize by saying, if we're going to run in parallel, for me, 1 week versus 2 weeks is not a real big concern.
So it's 12:02. Can we continue this conversation on next call and maybe start with this conversation in the community call, the working group? We can just adjust the minutes, because I don't think we're not going to change the charter. We have gotten a really good conversation. Summers, Scott, at the end there, it was so beautifully discussed. Summers, kudos to you for saying, I feel attacked. That is so important, and that is how we operate in this community. And it's so important. And Scott is amazing. I think we have communication and how direct we are. So I think as we continue to collaborate, more clearance and more curiosity and more questions will come up. I consider us to have moved forward, though we have most topics to be discussed next week. Kevin, what do you think about this? Because we're not changing the charter, we're not doing anything else. We're going to.
It's not been decided whether we are or are not changing the charter. That's all. This is still.
We need to talk about it next week.
Yeah, the thing that I hate is that we stretch this out for a week. So I think we have to continue this discussion on our Google group.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And Kevin, again, I think the main thing to focus on is I still didn't really grok how introducing a one-line derivative of the EFSP blew the timeline up. So I think that's like the first thing I'd like to get nailed down.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. All right. So who is going to send that message with a copy paste with the minutes to the agenda? Just the first part, working group, and this discussion that is written here that doesn't even have the names and all the conversation. We did, I think, a really poor job helping Kevin on the minutes today.
I'm still updating it. I will post it.
All right.
I did post the JESP, the Jakarta specification process. It's like 2 paragraphs. I mean, you know, it's not big. And already Ed put some effort into writing text about our review periods, which would go straight into that. So I mean, I will throw together a Word doc that has that in there if we want it to evaluate it. It should be fairly boilerplate. There shouldn't be a whole lot we have to add.
Okay, David, if you're saying that, then I'm going to be happy.
Okay.
No, I mean, this just all gets back to whenever we have, you know, our big group get together, a tiny little, you know, changing a semicolon to a period takes an hour.
Yes,
So,
I am concerned.
That's my concern as well. And since, hold on, that's my concern as well. And since there's more text in the charter versus an empty Word doc with a spec process on it, I've less fear about an empty doc than already big.
That's a very fair point. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So then the task, Kevin, the task for David is he will create the one doc that talks about MicroProfile spec process, the specification process.
Well, I'm just gonna take the Jakarta one with the opening. Yeah. This is a derivative of blah blah blah. Then I'm gonna take Ed's email. I'm gonna chuck it in the Word doc. I'm gonna post it to the list. That's gonna be what we're gonna get.
Sounds
not
amazing.
Gonna be very big, but
let's do that because I am really concerned to adjust anything in the charter. I do not believe it's a good idea anyway. So anyway, Kevin, 12:06. We have done a poor job with time.
No, we haven't. This has been a very good meeting.
I know, really good, but 12:06?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Summers. You guys got a little bit of a heat in this call, but it was a really good call, and your participation was very valuable and appreciated.
So Kevin, please remember to tweet it so we can retweet it from the handle.
Yeah, I do that. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.